Good morning, everybody. Welcome once again to BTL Bass Talk Live, where we're going to talk bass fishing and anything else that we want to talk about. Matthew, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am wonderful. Had a great weekend. All right, couple of things we got to take care of right off the bat. An incredible show today. We're going to launch the 20 Feet Deep documentary, The $1 Million Idea, and then we're also going to have Brett Hite on after we debut the documentary because he is a key part of the documentary.
He is.
All right. And you guys will be able to ask questions on the instant feedback, and we'll get his take on the documentary. He has seen it, and in setting this up, what was the comment that he made? I actually learned some stuff.
He did say. He said that he learned some things by watching the documentary. It is on the Chatterbait.
Yeah.
The $1 Million Idea.
And what, the last couple tournaments have been won on what?
Pretty
lure?
much everything. You look at the FLW Tour event, the Bassmaster Open that Stephen Browning just hit out of the park, and then the college regional tournament on Gunnersville that was a record 275 boat field. All three tournaments, the most three recent, I guess, big tournaments, have all been won on a Chatterbait.
Yeah.
So it's good timing.
And really, when you look back, it's so many lures that have impacted this industry. This is a top 5 dude. It's a top 5 lure, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. Do you remember the first time you ever saw it?
It was Rick Morris, I think.
It was the first time you ever saw it?
Yeah, when he was using it at the Classic that was on, what was that?
Is that the one he almost won?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first time I saw it.
Interesting.
What was the first time you saw it?
There was, I guess, an article in one of the magazines, and my dad bought me a couple and gave them to me in 2006, and I was home.
He was just like, here, you need to try these. I found these.
From playing junior hockey, I think it was, and fished a couple club tournaments in the off season.
Yeah.
And used them. That was the first time. They weren't the Z-Man, I don't think. I think they were like one of the knockoffs that he could get his hands on.
Huh. Yeah, well, you had to remember the Rick Morris thing. Yeah, I mean, that was a big deal back then.
I don't.
You don't? At all?
I wasn't at that Classic.
Huh. Okay. Thought you were.
He finished second.
He did. He did. And he spent a lot of time in the canals in between the lakes.
Oh, it would have been 2006 then.
Yeah.
The one that Luke Clausen won?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that was before I knew you.
Okay.
That was 2006.
All right. Cool stuff, though. So we will launch this here shortly. The other thing I want to mention is the last show that we did, I had my list, and I left something on the list that we did not discuss, and I want to bring it up real quick. Did you see what Derek Remitz did? Yeah,
he won the BFL on Gunnersville a couple weeks ago with over 30 pounds and did not do it on an Alabama rig.
Yeah.
You said traditional lures.
Lures.
Crankbait and a vibrating bait.
Lures.
So
it's freaking awesome, though.
Yeah, good to see him.
I
mean, you look at the top. There's a couple of those. You get those press releases from FLW that so-and-so wins BFL. And you look at the lake, and then you're like, that's interesting. I just like looking at those top 10s because usually there's a name from the past or a guy who's on fire who you're like, oh, I forgot about that guy, and he's still just dominating in the local scene. So.
Yeah, very cool. Glad to see him doing well. And 30 pounds at Gunnersville, it's not that
Gunnersville's
uncommon,
doing well right now. I mean, Gunnersville is on fire right now, apparently, based on all the social media posts. How did people find out that a lake was fishing good before social media? Because I got that email that Remitz said
phones, man.
And then I saw...
They're burning up the phones. Calling people.
Really? That's
yeah.
How it used to.
Yeah. In fact, there was a guy, here, this is a little history for you. There's a guy, his name was Richard Altman. And I don't know if you've ever heard that name. Nope. He lives on Lake Fork now. He was in Oklahoma. At one time, Matt, he actually sponsored, I think, 6 guys on the PBA tour. And he owned 3 bowling centers. Mm-hmm. One was in Oklahoma, owned a couple in Texas, and then was involved in other things. But his number one hobby and passion was bass fishing. And this is way, way, way before the internet.
So this is the 90s, 80s.
Late 80s, early 90s. He actually created a 1-800 phone number and created this network to where you would call up and then it would have a menu and you would select what lake that you would want a report on. So you'd call 1-888-dial-a-bass.
And it'd be
Seriously.
like, for Toledo Bend, press 1. For Sam Rayburn, press 2. For Lake Fork, press 3.
Yeah. And then there would be a recording for that lake on this system.
When one of the guides would give a report. And then
Except it wasn't toll-free. You
had to pay money.
You had to pay money.
Did he make any money on it?
He did. And then the internet came and it was
toast.
It was done. But yeah, Richard Altman, he's actually still alive, still lives on Lake Fork, fishes all the time, is friends with our good friend Steve Wonderlick.
Interesting.
That was on the show.
That I had no idea. Did you ever call in?
I did.
For what, Texoma?
I don't know, dude. But I remember calling in. Who knows? It was 20, 30 years ago. Long time ago. But they would show up. This was the other thing that he would do. He would show up at the outdoor shows and have a little area and sell the thing. It was Dial-a-Bass. Seriously, we talk about that all the time.
That was the name of it?
But that's what it... No, that's not what it was called. But it was Dial-a-Bass. I thought I told you that story. Yeah, Richard Altman. Very, very cool dude.
Speaking of Dial-a-Bass.
Very interesting.
Remember what I showed you last week? I got curious and I was Googling how to become a pro bass fisherman. And the wiki help. The first 3 steps in becoming involves phone calls and internet searches.
Yeah, somewhat dated there, but very relevant. All right, have to mention, man, dude, this is all I'm going to say about it. You had a little bit of a rough time at Grand Lake. A lot of people are wanting to know on the instant feedback. Barely missed a check at Grand Lake this weekend.
And I barely missed covering the 8-point spread.
Yeah, you had $6.95.
Finished 71st out of 275, and they paid $68.
Yeah, so now I only owe you, 2 lunches?
Yes.
Rather than 3?
2 lunches.
So, but it's on to the next one. A weird kind of Grand Lake, but a Grand Lake that we've seen before where you had a handful of guys that caught them really well, and then it dropped off.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big names, and it's weird because the people that dominate on Grand Lake, they have a very defined technique that they are really, really, really good at. And at certain time of the years, you can count on them being at the top of the leaderboard. But it was interesting to see some very, very big names really struggle during that event.
Yeah, there was definitely a certain part of the lake that sucked, which is obviously
the part you were in? Is that
the part we were in for the first 7 hours of the day where we didn't have a bite? But hey, we made an adjustment and made it interesting at the end. So
yeah, and it's going to be interesting when the Elite Series guys make their way there because it's going to be
totally different. That'll be a spawn.
Right in the middle of the spawn post spawn. You're going to have all 3 phases going on then.
Yep.
And the other characteristic that let me get your take on this because I spoke to Greg Wood and actually got a chance to talk to another individual that did not do well. Mr. Ed Barton, and he talked to me a little bit about what he did. But Grand is a lake where it is very, very difficult to win a 4-day event in the same area. Do you agree with that? Like you can't spend all 4 days in Duck Creek.
I mean, you could. Christie spent all 4 days in one area when he won.
Did he win?
In 2013. Yeah, he was
in one area. He was moving all over the place.
No,
dude.
He fished in the same area.
In the good Mid Lake area.
No, that was when he won in June of 2013 when the water was high. He flipped one area for 4 days because as the water was dropping, more and more fish would pull out to those areas and reposition on them. So he had a never-ending supply of them.
Yeah.
So he won those in one area.
But typically, I mean, that's a weird situation just based upon
but I mean, where can
conditions.
you? What lake can you for 4 days unless it's like in one area, I think actually Grand, I think if it's on one area, actually, I mean, in a large area, like a 100-acre area.
I mean, I've talked to, that's a very large area, 100 acres. big area.
Yeah, but all of Duck Creek, I
Yeah.
mean, Creed almost won it all in Duck Creek back in 2009.
From the mouth all the way
Yeah,
back to the
I mean,
railroad,
that's what I
or
could-
not
yeah.
the railroad tracks, but the blown out bridge. I don't know. I the people that I've spoke with over the years say it's very, very difficult to fish a defined area for 4 days and win that.
I don't know. I've
I am really,
I've
really
never fished it
interested.
for 4 days.
I know.
so-
I'm really interested in seeing what they do for 4 days, whoever wins, and see if they do fish in one defined area for 4 days. I'm going to go out there and say no. And that
No, I
has a lot to
agree
do
on
with
that.
history.
I agree on that. I think
Especially
you're gonna
this
see
time
some
of the year.
spawning fish, some post spawn.
Yeah.
You could see a guy catch him cranking. You could see a guy catch him spawning.
Yeah.
The whole nine. Everything is in play
Yeah.
that time of year. Everything from giant baits to finesse baits.
Absolutely. All right. Last bit of business. I want to thank everybody that has submitted reviews on iTunes. And for the iTunes listeners that are listening to this replay, you're going to be able to get something out of it. But at the same time, you're going to get a heck of a lot more because there are some scenes in the documentary that have text.
Right. Just a little
the
bit
video.
of text. I don't know if you have XM radio. Have you ever listened to SC featured on the radio?
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell there's certain times where it's just kind of slow classical music where you're kind of missing the setup text. But as a whole, you'll be able to get a really good feel for what is going on if you just have the opportunity to listen to the audio version. It's about 33 minutes long.
Yeah.
And the majority of it is audio.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking. There's no juiced up.
But you need to go back and watch it.
Yeah.
If you listen on iTunes,
pretty straightforward.
You really need to go back and watch it.
From the
All right. The other
beginning
thing
to
is,
the winning.
hey, we're going to continue to take reviews to win that $100 prize pack full of just a plethora of tackle and goodies. And I've got some hoodies too. I found some hoodies.
Some
this
goodies
week.
and hoodies.
Goodies and hoodies, man. So get a review in there. Do a review. Do a rating for us. And from last Tuesday up until the day that we have the first competition day at the Classic, we're going to randomly select somebody. And then once we get back from South Carolina in the Classic, we'll announce on the next show, we'll announce who the winner is.
That could be a Chatterbait deal.
Could be.
The way things are shaping up with the water coming up and a lot of that bank grass in the water. And pre-spawn fish and the shad and herring.
Yep. So a big thank you to all the people that have done reviews and given us 1 star to five stars. So greatly appreciate that. And why don't we go ahead and set it up, Matt? Just kind of set it up. I know we've worked on this project for well over a year and a half. It's taken some time to kind of put it together and put all the pieces
yeah, I mean,
together.
it kind of started. Dave Rush, who's been with us for 8 years now, is from Charleston, South Carolina, and he grew up in the Greenwood area. It's all kind of around the Carolina deals where the Davises, Ron Davis, who invented the Chatterbait, was originally from. So he's always kind of had an in on it and remember seeing them. There's an article on Baston that I wrote, but you remember seeing them before they were popular. And, he's fished against Thrift and these guys, before they were on the tour because Dave fishes all the local stuff. So he kind of had an interest in this. And then as it grew in popularity and we started doing our 20 feet deep features, you did the Ike Way. We did Knowing Mr. Kennedy. We did the Gunnersville Effect. We were like, man, we really need to do a lure.
A thing.
Yeah, and we had no, when we did this and everything, we had no ties, affiliation, anything with Rad Lures or Z-Man or anything. We just started. So Dave kind of took it upon himself and went and met with the guys who invented it and who ran it. And then he went to he went to a bunch. Basically, he decided, I'm going to tell the whole story, and all these guys were all within a drivable radius.
Yeah.
And then, I got a hold of Brett Hite when he was out on tour to talk about it, and he met up with Brian Thrift when he was at the Forest Wood Cup to talk about it, and went to some expos to talk to some of the vendors that sold it. So that's how it kind of all came about. And then we kind of came back and we're like, well, how do we put this together to tell this story? And it's pretty cool. The $1 million idea, you came up with that title, and it really is the $1 million idea. And it became a $1 million idea, and you'll find this out in the documentary, literally overnight.
Yeah.
So much build up to it, and then a couple things happen at a couple times at the right time. and it was here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the setup.
All right. So here you have it, folks. 20 feet deep, the $1 million idea. Enjoy it. We will be back with Brett Hite afterwards, live via Skype. Everybody enjoy.
Well, going back a long time ago, and I'm saying a long time ago, I'm talking back even as early as the 60s, okay? There was a lure that, of course, my father and his friends, it was called, it looked like a top of a beer can, called a Walker Special. And it had an unbelievable wobble, and it had a lot of action. And back in those days, there was a lot of baits that caught a lot of fish, but this was a novelty, and it worked. It just had tremendous vibration. And I always wanted to impart that vibration to another lure that had a bigger profile, plus it would not be prone to hang up, basically. You know, just be snag resistant type lure.
He's got the mindset, he'll work on something and then he'll get frustrated a little bit and then he'll go to something else and then get, you know, but that was always in the back of his mind to be able to couple a jig with that type of vibration. And he literally has hundreds of different models of that type of action coupled with what you can cast with something a jig dressing can be put behind.
I guess I'm different than most fishermen in the way that when I go to the lake bass fishing, there's not a bought lure on the end of my line, no matter what reel it is. It's something I've created or altered to the point wherever I'm fishing, the fish hadn't seen that before from anybody but me.
Some of the early versions of a chatterbait had the weight molded onto the blade, which the Walker Special had the weight molded onto the blade. So it's initially just trying to attach a hook in some manner to that, but that was a big step forward to taking the weight off the blade and putting an unweighted blade on a weighted jig head. But it took 15 years of R&D with just playing with it and putting it down to get to a state to where the right configuration, the right hole placement, the right shape of the blade,
and the right trailer,
you know, all of that. It took a while.
The initial design was a very narrow blade in the front, and I had the problem, of course, the blade slipping through the eyelets. So I increased the width of the blade in the front. And at that time, I recognized the fact that, hey, this thing's going to go a certain distance, it's going to stop, and it's going to go back. And that created an incredible amount of vibration. You could actually feel it on your rod tip.
What year did you?
98.
Okay, retired in 98, and he was able to put his full you know, efforts towards developing. I mean, it's always been something that's been a dream of his to get this thing perfected. I don't know what's in there and what's in there, but it's about being, you know, he's always wanted to perfect that type of lure. Right. But each prototype had some type of problem to me, and he was bouncing things off of me. It was either it had hung up too much, or the vibration wasn't frequent enough, or if you reeled it fast enough, it would blow out, or it would come to the surface too quickly, or we couldn't get the right dressing on. But in 2002, there was something real close to what's there now he came up with, and I said, from what I'm doing fishing, that's it. We can do something with this. It's unique. There's nothing out like it. There's some things that have tried to touch on it, but this is something that we can fill a niche with.
Never really had a vision of this being a commercially viable product. The only time that vision came to fruition was when I was in the boat with this young man right over here.
Well, he was doing it to win tournaments.
Yeah, I was.
He didn't have the goal really to
No.
take it to market. He just wanted an edge fishing tournament. I mean, we
Yeah.
just fish small tournaments together.
Yeah.
We still enjoy doing that. So at that point in time, in 2003, all of our efforts were towards getting some patent protection on the bait, some trademark applications in, and also just trying to maximize its efficiency with how we can not only manufacture it, but also the best possible action. Now, he's a perfectionist, and if it were still up to him, it would never be marketable because nothing's ever good enough. That's just the way he is, and I'm not quite that way.
Yeah, that's true.
We finally agreed that in 2003 we would try to have it on the market by 2004. This is the original Chatterbait, the first one that we agreed on as being prototype right here. 3/8 ounce, foil on the blade, white and chartreuse.
3/8 ounce. This guy here was I guess you call yourself a tennis pro, teaching pro. Okay, he was at Gatewood Country Club in Greenwood teaching tennis to the ladies, making a nice salary. It was in wintertime, I believe. What year was that, Ron? 2000 what?
2003.
2003. He handed in his resignation, making a good salary with 2 young children, to say, I'm gonna make fishing lure. First show we attended was, I think, in Columbia, South Carolina, and we couldn't even get inside the building. We had to stay on the outside of the building.
That was Sportsman's Expo.
Yeah. And matter of fact, a guy that a lot of people around the fishing industry know, Mr. Robbie Byram, had Byram's Country Store up there on Highway 160 going over to Fort Mill. He was the first to put them in his store. In 2004, we only sold 5,000 pieces, and most of those were at the shows. The very first big show we did was the Bassmaster Classic on Lake Wiley. Some of your better fishermen that were willing to try something new. A lot of you bass fishermen don't think there's nothing new. Some of those great fishermen, you can always put Brian Thrift right at the head of the class. There were also people like Roger Pope, Hank Cherry. I would deliver to those guys. Once this thing got the information got out this thing's worth fishing with, I was actually making up baits by the box, sometimes 24 to a box, and hand delivering them to the Bass Pro Shop. Me, Roger Pope, and Hank Cherry, the person to deliver those baits to them. And they didn't want anybody to know how they were catching fish, which you don't blame them.
Well, the first time I was actually introduced to a chatterbait was when Ron was making them in his house at Greenwood, South Carolina. You know, they'd sold some to some shops up around where I'm at in North Carolina, and we were throwing them, you know, 3 or 4 years before they ever even made it out on the national tournament scene. So we'd been catching them around the house on it for a long time. Brian's trying to get a foothold in the career at the time. I mean, he is Everstart, trying to make his jump to FLW. But of course, he wants to retain an edge too. So it's a very fine line. When I first started traveling and fishing, I fished as a co-angler on the Costa Series, and I actually won a tournament on a chatterbait at Lake Eufaula. And the story behind that is that we went into the last day of the event, and I'm the only guy in the tournament with a chatterbait other than, you know, my other buddies from North Carolina. So I draw a guy out, and we go out, in first 30 minutes, I catch 20 pounds on a chatterbait. He's throwing a spinnerbait and hadn't caught a bass. So I give him a chatterbait, and he goes on to win the pro side. I win the co-angler side. And we kind of never really said anything about it. And you know, Ron heard about it, and he's like, man, you got to talk about the chatterbaits. I
basically called with hat in hand, begging, look, I know, and you're a good enough fisherman. I told him this, you're going to make it regardless, but we need help. And that's about the time where to me, my opinion of how the whole retail market changed with the lure industry in the early 2000s, with the age of the internet, when every tournament result was published. No longer were the fishing shows on Saturday morning the drivers of the market. It was how people were doing on Saturdays in their little local tournaments or the real big tournaments. That started driving the market in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I knew that it would take one big break. And I knew that he had confidence in the lure. And I knew he already had success with the lure. And he basically said, without hesitation, of course, I'll do everything I can for you.
I'd caught some fish on a chatterbait in practice, and that's pretty much all I had going. I didn't realize how good it was. Like, the fish had never seen it before, and it was just unimaginable at the big fish I caught down there in the tournament. I mean, I caught like an 8 or 9 pounder every day, and 2 of the 4 days I caught 2 over 8. So it's just phenomenal bite, and nobody else had them. You know, I'm having my way with these fish with a chatterbait they've never seen before. And the first day of the event, Rob Newell interviews me, and he says, Brian, you're in whatever 2nd or 3rd place. You know, how'd you catch your fish? And nobody wants to tell what they caught them on the first day. Well, I remembered talking to Ron, and I remembered my promise. You know, Ron, if I catch them on a chatterbait, I'm going to mention it.
He put that on the internet. At that point, we were history.
It really didn't matter because they couldn't get them that quick. It was too hard to get baits back then, and so I was the only one throwing it in the tournament. And Ron calls me up and he's like, what's going on? Chatterbait sales are going crazy. And then I ended up winning the event on the chatterbait, and it just blew up from there.
He did what he did. We picked up his entry fees for the remainder of his tournaments after that. So, you know, immediately I wanted to know we were serious about this, and we want you to be the face in your field for this product. We sold 25,000 lures in 2005, and I had geared up because wishful thinking in 2006 we would sell 100,000 lures, and at that level I could actually make a decent living, supplement his income, and we would be fine. Well, in 2006 in January was when Brian won the Everstart, and the FLW followed 2 weeks later, and 5 of the top 10 were using chatterbaits, when the projection of 100,000 went to 2 million in 2 weeks.
You had no way out. The number one, even the money that it would take to make 1 million pieces, even if it takes you $1 to make one, how you gonna make 1 million pieces? And that was a stumbling block. I mean, I couldn't make more than what, even 100,000.
At that point in time, we had 6 employees.
Yeah, he hired 6 people.
When I was in Greenwood, he was still here doing what he could do, helping out with, doing some heads and putting stickers on blades, things of that nature. But our capability was about 5,000 a week at full capacity. And we had Brian Thrift that would come on his days off, Casey Ashley, Andy Montgomery.
Yep, Andy.
They would come when they could, to help assemble what they could, just to help out.
As soon as I talked to Thrift, he'd won the tournament. We tried to order as many as we could get, and of course Ron was not a large company, so he didn't have tons of chatterbaits, but we got what we could and sold them. And I even had people coming in buying them and putting them on eBay and really making a lot of money on them. I really didn't know that's what they were doing to begin with, but it was just crazy. Got to a point that you couldn't get them. The prices they were getting on eBay were ridiculous for the baits.
Well, for me, and my wife also, actually, my wife was one of the ones, Valerie. She was my customer service agent. She had bribes of several $100s to get people's orders out. They would send her gifts. And again, I had total support from my entire family, from this family here, my parents and my sisters, to my wife and my children. Made a lot of huge sacrifices, which I'm extremely thankful for. But there was no limit to what these anglers would pay for a lure. And eBay had them for anywhere between $100 and $150 a piece during that time period. But certain stores were trying to slip money in our back pocket to try to get their orders out quicker than the next store. And I don't find that odd or weird, but everything was moving so quickly. Everybody wanted to make their money from it very quickly.
Every bait that we got in, we sold. I mean, as soon as they came in the door, they were gone, and a bunch of people would come in and prepay for them, and they were sold before I even got them.
Z-Man was making our skirts for us, and also we were in talks with them with helping us to do some of the labor for production, just labor, in-house labor. We were already in talks with them on that.
Z-Man's been around in one form or another for about 30 years. We started off as simply a silicone skirt manufacturing company. We were actually an offshoot of another company that they were in the automotive industry making silicone products, and one of the guys that was on board that company at the time was a bass fisherman and looked at the silicone tape and thought, hey, I can find a way to color this and slit this into strands and make skirts out of it. And that's how we got started.
When Brian won the tournament on Okeechobee, all of that got thrown into fast motion, but it got to be more than what they could do as well, in-house, with the amount of employees that they had. So an employee that's still with Z-Man, John Wahop, came to Greenwood. We sat and met. And that's when discussions began as far as them helping out with their resources to pull us out of the hole and put their resources behind it, and we could work off of a royalty deal. So that's when that all happened. But it all happened within a 2-week time. But it took at least 6 months to get straightened out.
We were building these baits. They were co-branded Z-Man and Rad lures. It was under a license agreement, which license agreements are pretty standard in the industry. When an inventor has a bait, whether or not they have a patent, but they have a bait design, they essentially sell that idea to the company in exchange for a per unit royalty. That goes on all the time. And that's kind of how that was our relationship with the Davises from 2006 until 2008.
It was such a simple concept. I know a lot of people would probably say, well, why didn't I think of that? Well, it didn't happen overnight, obviously, as you've seen, but it was such a simple and easy thing to do that allowed all your backyard tackle manufacturers, they could put their own together very easily, and not being knowledgeable about when there are patent implications, as well as trademark, as well as trade dress. The general public had no clue what type of infringement or what kind of consequences could come from that if they didn't. It was just lack of knowledge.
On the patent protection side and the intellectual property side, Ron Davis was very, very smart. And part of that was due to his background outside the industry. But a lot of inventors, especially fishing lure inventors that are, might be tinkering in their garage, coming up with concepts on their own, not associated with a large company, don't really have the foresight, the background, or the knowledge to take the right steps to protect their product. And that requires a pretty significant investment of time and money.
If you go to the Bass Pro Shop, there are a category of lures. You got crankbaits, you got spinnerbaits, you got jerkbaits, you got different categories of lures, and none of those lures are patented items because they've been done for so long. So it was very unique in a lure that came along that was a different way of making a bait wiggle.
All the way going back to 2004, 2005, the right papers were filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The patent applications were filed then as the product was being brought onto the market. And that's what you have to do in order to protect an invention. Only the original inventor can file for that patent. That's what the Davises did, is they filed for that patent. It wasn't granted immediately.
It took us, 5 years?
Over 5 years.
To secure a patent, and I'm going to say in excess of $100,000.
The simplicity of the patent is what it is, and it's no secret for people that want to do the research. It's basically, it can be summed up in one sentence. It is a blade attached to a weighted hook in a manner where the oscillation of the blade is restricted. Now, we've expanded on that, but that's a pretty broad statement. There's a blade attached to a weighted hook.
Single hole.
With at least one hole that has restricted oscillation. And the oscillation can be restricted by either the eyelet or the head itself.
I had a couple buddies that were using the Phoenix bladed jig, vibrating jig. So I bought some green pumpkin ones. Obviously green pumpkin on anything is my favorite color just because of the versatility. And then I bought some, some swim Cincos, some Lake Fork Magic Shads. And literally I was up in the north end of Clear Lake. It's in the fall, it's just solid grass. And I was sitting there eating my lunch. I'm like, you know what? I'll tie on one of those Phoenix vibrating jigs and I'm gonna put this swim bait trailer on the back and put green pumpkin with green pumpkin. Stood up, made a cast. First cast, I caught a 5.5 pounder. And I was like, man, maybe there's something to this thing. Coming from Arizona, we don't really have any grass lakes. So besides fishing the Delta and Clear Lake on the West Coast, we really didn't have much grass lake. So having went to Clear Lake and did well at the end of that 07 season, and kind of having a little confidence in a grass bait. And I know I'm going to Toho Kissimmee, which is, we all know, is solid hydrilla milfoil. I mean, whatever kind of grass you want to go to or look for. And literally I took that bait that I did well at Clear Lake on, had it tied on, and that was my search bait. I mean, the biggest thing in Florida fishing is trying to, there's always small areas that hold lots of fish. So it's really hard to flip and cover enough water. So you got to have a really good search bait. And obviously I went to Toho, and I think I had the biggest winning margin at that time. To come from Toho, drive like crazy, get to the Delta, which is one of my favorite places in the whole entire world to fish. Just having the confidence that I love the Delta so much and the confidence in that bait. Obviously momentum's a big thing in any type of sport that you have, and it just rolled on, and that's really what kind of kick-started my career to that next level. It definitely kind of put my name towards that bait, and it just kind of, obviously it got it more popular.
Well, at the time, we were in a tough spot. Things had gotten so crazy with production. I was moving farther away from the actual process of new product development. There were lots of offers, lots of offers from different, but we found Z-Man to be had the best opportunity through them because they were not only local, but they were already involved in the process. If we were to jump to another entity, that would slow the process down. You would have lags in sales. It'd get confusing with contracts that had already been done. It was just the best fit, and they put a very fair offer out there with bonus contingencies contingent upon different milestones with patents and intellectual property, which we were still in charge of, and it was something at the time we just felt like we couldn't turn down.
Became clear, and I think it was mutual on both sides, that long term, the best thing for the Chatterbait brand and the best thing for the Davises probably not to have to be involved day to day in all the headaches that go along with manufacturing and distributing and selling a product, for Z-Man to essentially acquire the Chatterbait portfolio. The brand name, at the time, there were patents that were pending that the Davises had filed for. There was the name Chatterbait was trademarked, and then they had also were smart enough to register trade dress protection on the hexagon-shaped blade. So in 2008, early in 2008, we essentially purchased that whole portfolio from the Davises company, Rad Lures, and Chatterbait became a Z-Man product that was owned by Z-Man. The first patent didn't issue until 2009. So, when we acquired the brand, that was kind of part of our calculus, is that we knew that these patent applications had been filed. It took a long time to prosecute that through all the way through all the different steps in the patent office. So we knew that was a possibility, not necessarily even a likelihood at the time, but we knew that we may have that additional protection. And that was a big factor for us in making the acquisition, that we knew that we may be able to protect that invention. That made it even a more valuable asset for us.
This was a certificate we got on a plaque, burnished on a plaque of the original Chatterbait patent. Obviously see the name up there, James Ronald Davis, which is my dad. It only took 5 years and 6 figures to get it through, but we finally got it.
I think a lot of people have learned what style or what quality of fish it catches, and what a great tool it is at fishing. Not only aquatic vegetation, but it's really works good around docks, works good in rocks. It works good in every scenario that you would almost throw a spinnerbait or anything like that. But I think it's just a lot better bait than a spinnerbait anymore.
To dethrone Greg Mulhead and earn the title of champion, you need 8 pounds and 5 ounces. Your 5 today worth 14.
Something felt funny. I set the hook, and I was thinking, man, I hope this isn't a tree limb. And I saw that my line was coming towards me, and then came up and wallered, and it was, almost 8-pounder, and really dug under the boat. That was the biggest fish I've caught all week.
It obviously got a lot more exposure with bass because a lot of guys look at that. And really, you got guys like Zona who's really breaks down the pattern, and I think that kind of obviously clues people in. And now from 14 to now, I mean, the Chatterbait craze is on.
I think that what the pros do on tour, whether it's Bassmaster or FLW, I think that's very important and really largely dictates bait sales. Of course, in 2006, Ryan Thrift's victory is what kicked this thing off. But if you go back 2 years to 2014, when Paul Mueller had the largest bag in Bassmaster Classic history, the largest single day bag, and finished second in the Classic, almost won the thing. And then Brett Hite followed that up with 2 victories on the Chatterbait Elite. We saw our sales skyrocket immediately after that. So it wasn't like the Chatterbait ever went away or anything like that. It's just kind of a refresher that brings it to the front of mind. So I think what the pros do, what the pros are winning on, is very important. And you know, a lot of people that have been in the industry for a long time say, they've told me, you know, you look at what wins the Bassmaster Classic at the beginning of the year, and that's what's going to be the hot the rest of the year. I think that probably used to be the case more so than now, but it just kind of illustrates the point of, you know, how important tournament success is to bait sales. I think that's a lot more true with baits than it is with rods or reels or electronics.
Yeah, I would say, you know, let's say 8 years ago, you know, I would say in the Elite Series or FLW Tour, maybe 10% of the guys had a bladed jig tied on. And then now I would say, I mean, I would say at least 90% of the guys have a bladed jig tied on.
If I had cloudy, windy conditions, I stayed with it. I call it a Trickster 2, but it's just a Chatterbait copy that I don't sell Z-Man. And fair to Z-Man, I like what they do. They make you, they sue you, and they said, I wish all companies could do that and protect stuff in this business. So I applaud them for how they protect that bait. But it's basically was a Chatterbait type. I just put a little bit different hook in it.
Any tournament success on a bladed jig, when somebody just says that they're using a bladed jig and, you know, doesn't mention Chatterbait specifically, ultimately that helps us because our bladed jigs are the most widely available ones out there. They're the only ones out there that have that direct head-to-blade connection. And I think at this point, most anglers know that if you put a split ring in there between the head and the blade, it's going to kill the action. I mean, look at what's tied onto their rods. You don't see the bladed jigs with the split rings in between there. So ultimately, I think it helps us because when somebody wins a tournament on a bladed jig, whether they say it's a Chatterbait or not, you know, when that person goes into Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's or Academy or their local tackle shop, usually the Chatterbait brand products are what they're going to see and what they're going to buy. So it definitely helps us. The Chatterbait is definitely a huge player for Z-Man. It makes up a large portion of our sales, and you know, going back 5 or 6 years ago, it was probably most of our sales. As we're introducing more and more products, plastics, you know, skirted jigs, doing a lot of jig heads, packaged silicone skirts, you know, it's definitely becoming, you know, a smaller piece of the pie for Z-Man, but the overall quantity that we're selling is actually still increasing, which is pretty neat. I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of the different options and the different price points that we're starting to hit. You know, doing versions of the Chatterbait that are more weedless, more snag resistant, things like that. And we're constantly kind of expanding to give the consumers and the anglers what they want.
Over my professional career of 11 years, I've won 2 Angler of the Year trophies, and I've got 6 major tournament wins on the FLW Tour and the TTBC. And a Chatterbait has played a role in at least 3 wins, like probably over 50% of the fish I've weighed in those 3 wins were on a Chatterbait. And Angler of the Year, you can't put a number on that because I don't go to a lake for practice or start a tournament without having a Chatterbait on my deck.
You know, over my career, I would say just on a bladed jig. I mean, obviously catching some fish on a bladed jig through tournaments. You know, I probably won right around $1 million on using a bladed jig. So it's been good to me. I love throwing it, and obviously, you know, I catch big fish doing it. So it's just it's a win-win.
Will there ever be a bait as dominant as that comes out in the next couple of years? I don't know. The only thing I could compare it to was the Alabama rig was about as successful as the chatterbait. I mean, it was something the fish haven't seen before. I don't know if there's anything left out there to make that can do what the chatterbait did when it first got on the scene as far as the sheer numbers of fish it caught.
If you think of all the companies, large and small, out there, along with all the other garage inventors and tinkerers, then it's really hard in the tackle industry to come up with something that's truly unique. It's even harder to come up with something that's distinct enough to be patentable. In order to be patentable, it has to be very distinct and different from anything before it. And I think that's one thing that makes the chatterbait and the invention and the rise of the chatterbait even that much more impressive, that it was something that's truly unique and that it did create a whole new lure category.
As it stands today, you've got a chatterbait, which is considered a bladed swim jig. At the time, you got thousands of variations of crankbaits. There's only one bladed swim jig. There's got to be other ways to create the same type action without infringing on the original chatterbait patent. And that's what I've been waiting on for this many years. Somebody's got to do it better. And I think it could be done better, or be done in a manner that would be a little bit different type action, maybe just different to where it would be an item that would be even different to the fish. I think it'd be done.
That's kind of, the dream of every fisherman out there, every tinkerer, every lure inventor, to come up with an idea in their garage, to perfect it, have guys win tournaments on it, and basically turn it into $1 million idea.
He's got some really unique ideas because he tries to get as far away from the normal as possible. And there are a lot of things that are coming down the pipe with us that hopefully we'll have hit the marketplace.
All right, there you have it, Matthew. The $1 million idea. And I got a lot from that. And I'm kind of like Brett. Every time I watch it, I learn something. But the one conclusion that I've come to is they are not done with coming up with something new.
No.
The Davis family and Senior, obviously his laboratory, he is working on other things.
Off the record. When Dave went and filmed that, obviously that was at their home.
Yeah.
There were, Dave wanted to get some photos of the prototypes or maybe stuff they were working on to use for B-roll. And I guess there were a couple rooms that Dave was not allowed in.
The lab, man.
The lab that he, he's a member of the media, and there was some stuff in there, fishing lure related, that they just really didn't want anyone else to see at this time. So Dave was like, curiosity. I was so curious. I wanted to know what it was. But so obviously they're working on there. So
yeah, it truly is the $1 million idea. And Daniel with Z-Man said it there toward the end. I mean, how many times have there been people across the U.S. and really across the world that think that they have that $1 million idea, and it truly does turn into the $1 million idea. And the other thing is, too, didn't Brett Hite say in the documentary he's won over $1 million
absolutely
on the bait? It'd be very, very cool to find out exactly, and you can never do it, but how many dollars have been won across the country just on that bait?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, and Brian Thrift touched on it, was it's impossible to really kind of to put a number to it, because there's a lot of times where, you know, it'll account for 1 or 2 fish or a key fish here, or maybe it helps get him to a championship event that he then wins on a different lure. But a lot of behind the scenes work, as far as, and I could have done just a 30-minute edit of that, of those guys talking about the pain in the ass that it was to get the copyright and the patent protection and the trade dress and all that. There was a lot, and quite frankly, it was pretty boring to listen to. But it was interesting a way, because they had a real intimate understanding of how all that worked. So a very important part of the documentary, but so many more little elements to that could have gone in. You know, like I said, there could be just a documentary on what it was like just to get that little plaque with his name on it that says that he can, you know, that the blade makes the bait wiggle.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break, come back with Brett Hite live via Skype. And if you have some questions, fire up the instant feedback for Brett, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Chatterbait.
The most versatile fishing machine on Earth. Unparalleled resolution and clarity, with more agility, lightning speed, and brute strength. HDS Carbon takes rapid response performance and screen technology to an all-new level. Maximized power, maximized visibility. See Structure Scan 3D, new dual chirp sonar, new live network sonar, and more mapping options, all at the same time and faster than ever before. Pros depend on hydraulic jack plates to get the best out of their boats. Do what they do. Demand Atlas performance. Atlas gets you from the bottom to the top in less than 8 seconds, even with the big 4 strokes. And when you gotta turn right around and get that heavy load back up in rough water, Atlas's innovative design and American-made components will get you there with confidence.
I'm at Depot. Just look for yourself. There's an Atlas jack plate on just about every professional's boat.
The Atlas hydraulic jack plate. You can depend on it.
My rods look different because they are different. Every rod is built by the pros and for the pros. When you pick up a white Duckett fishing rod, you're getting a cutting-edge rod, one that's truly pro-driven with the actions you need for every bait category you fish. I put my name on it. It's my promise to build you a great rod you can count on.
Duckett Fishing, Micro Magic, Macro Magic, or White Ice.
Try them. They work.
What's up, guys? Scott Martin here, Team AFCO. Hey, if you want to have a chance to fish with me at a lake near you, well, check out the link below. It's going to be a lot of fun, guys.
The Lowrance Elite 7 TI. Why does it lead the pack? It's simple. More bang for your buck. Use Elite 7 TI with the all-new Total Scan transducer, and you get all of your sonar from a single transducer install. That's broadband sounder, chirp sonar, side scan, and down scan imaging from one transducer. Now that's something to chirp about. Elite 7 TI. Premium features have never been so affordable.
I'm looking for signs before practice even starts. Crossing the bridge, I'm checking for current. Is the lake up or down? What's my watercolor? Bird activity tells me where the shad are before I ever launch my boat. Sometimes the best things hit me right in the face.
The pesky biffle bugs. There's always a hatch on your lake. Made in America by Jean LaRue Lures.
Dang bug juice, it's everywhere.
When I talk about Sunline, I think of one word, confidence.
Sunline FX2 is what I use for all of my frogging and flipping.
SX1 braid, which braid plays a big part in fishing line. Shooter, I'm going to use in those close quarter deals like flipping and pitching.
One of my favorite techniques in fishing the tournament trail is to fish offshore ledges.
We have taken the questions out of the equation.
Take my word for it. It works. It works, dude.
All right, we are back. Mark and Matt in studio on a Tuesday, kicking off the week. And we just aired our latest 20 Feet Deep documentary, The $1 Million Idea. And a lot of good feedback on the instant feedback, Matthew.
Well, that's good. It's better than bad feedback.
Oh, I'm sure we'll get some, but that's okay. That comes with the territory. So when we were getting ready to put the show together and we were talking about it, we thought that it would be a really cool idea to get one of the principals in the documentary on to talk a little bit about it. And you reached out for Brett Hite.
Obviously one of the two guys, I guess, who, quote, made it famous.
Yeah.
Brian Thrift and Brett Hite. And Brett talks more about it. Brian Thrift just goes, oh, shucks, I just went down the bank and threw this thing with a blade on it and caught 20 pounds 17 days in a row. I don't know how that happened. I just got lucky 6 years in a row.
Yeah.
So Brett will actually, he'll break it down a little bit. There's actually a whole kind of part B to this where Brett Hite talks about the arsenal of rods, reels, line, lures, trailers, the whole system that has spawned just from the bladed jig. It's impressive on, it's kind of like a spider web effect. You start with this and you're like, this works. Well, if this works, it leads to this, this, and this. And it's an entire system that took him 45 minutes on camera to describe and explain why he does what he does with it.
All right, let's bring him in. Brett, you there, man?
Yeah, how you guys doing?
Doing good, man. Thanks for taking time out, and a lot of good feedback on our instant feedback already on the documentary, but we appreciate you taking time out to talk a little bit about how influential this bait has been in the world of bass fishing.
Yeah, it turned out really good, guys. It was pretty cool that you came up with the idea to kind of highlight the bait and how it came about, and it turned out really good. It's just obviously it's been a special bait for me, but I get so much good feedback from people all over the United States that have seen me use the bait, and then they started using it, and they catch a lot of big fish on it too. So it's kind of gratifying to hear those stories too.
You said you learned some stuff when the first time you watched it. What was something that you picked up that you didn't know about the bait?
The original design was like a 1960s kind of a flat bladed bait with a weight on it. That's how they got that blade design, and he wanted to make it more weedless. So after it took him 30 years, kind of messing around with it and coming up with new ideas, and that little flat weighted blade bait back in the 60s is kind of what it originated from. He wanted to get that vibration into something that was weedless. So pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm going to try the original Walker Special now. I saw that, and I was like, you know what? I bet that would still catch him today under certain conditions.
Are you gonna throw that on Throwback Thursdays?
Yeah, the Walker Special.
That's my Thursday plug.
That's funny. All right, some people are sending in some comments and questions on the instant feedback. We'll get to those in a minute. I'm curious, Brett, why the color green pumpkin?
It's just the most versatile color in all of the United States. Whether you're fishing clear water or dirty water, brackish water, and for me, it really represents that brim or bluegill color. And pretty much everywhere we go, or even a perch, everywhere we go in the United States, we have brim, bluegill, or perch. And the bigger bass, that's some of their forage, whether it's a smallmouth or a largemouth or a spotted bass. So it's just a real versatile color wherever we go, and just looks really, really natural.
One of the things that you talked about when we did our interview for your portion of this documentary, and it didn't make the final cut. I had it in several of the versions before, and it just couldn't figure out how to fit it in, but was the fact that Rick Clunn, who won on the St. Johns River in 2016, actually reached out to you for, I guess, advice on how to throw the bladed jig, how to throw a chatterbait, and you talked a little bit about that on camera, but since it didn't make it, go ahead and talk a little bit about what that was like and how that conversation went down, and then right afterwards, bam, he wins on it.
Yeah, I mean, Rick just had some questions. He'd been throwing a chatterbait or a bladed jig for a long time, and he said he'd been watching a bunch of my videos and just had some questions on his biggest thing was losing fish on it. And, I have a whole system of how whether it works for me or not works for somebody else, but I explain my system to him. And like I said, he'd been fishing the bladed jig and caught lots of big ones. He was just having a landing problem. His percentage was way down actually getting the fish in the boat. And next thing you know, he goes to the first tournament and absolutely smokes us on it. But, and he goes, man, I really hate to bother you with this. I'm like, okay, Rick Clunn's calling me for advice. No, you're good, bud. It's all good. So, no, it was a pretty neat thing. Obviously, he looked up to me on that bait to ask me for advice, and I got no problem hooking him up. He's done so much for the sport that I'd love to give anything back to him.
Very cool. All right, Brett, in the documentary, you talk about the first time and the first cast that you threw the bladed jig, the bait. What I want to know is, obviously that's got to be a special day just from everything that was built upon that day. But when you got off the water and that day was over, did you think about truly how good this thing was going to be, or was it just a passing thought from a very standard day on Clear Lake?
Yeah, it was a good day. It really was. It was a really good day. I probably had 25 pounds that day. But you're at Clear Lake too. You're like, okay, yeah, that can happen pretty much every day of the week here. But, it just gave me something in the back of my mind, arsenal to fish that super shallow, almost topped out grass where you really can't fish a whole lot of other baits besides maybe a swim jig or something like that, and actually be productive and have it so that you can actually work the bait. I mean, you can't throw a rattle trap and stuff like that, but a lot of time, that time of year, a rattle trap bite is very, very good too. But most of the time you could never fish that rattle trap in that style of grass. So it just put something to my arsenal. And then, you take any of those little arsenal techniques and you put it in your memory bank, and it's like, oh, I'm going to Kissimmee, Florida. Maybe we'll break out the old bladed jig. And next thing you know, it's been all over ever since then.
You mentioned also in the minute you started out with that Phoenix vibrating jig, and then there's you've won some on the original Chatterbait, the Chatterbait Elite. Now you're throwing the jackhammer. You talked about it and how there were 70, 80 different variations. From the time you started throwing it to, let's say, the latest version of the jackhammer now, how many different types and combinations of bladed jigs do you think you've thrown over the course of your career?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's like designing the jackhammer, we had a lot of different variations, you know, whether it was the size of the blade, hole size, hole position, bend in the blade. I mean, there's just a bunch of different versions, but I'd say, you know, there's probably, 20 or 30 of those just to try to get it right and run right. It's just like anything else, it's like somebody with a square bill crankbait, like a Rick Clunn, he's going to really, really perfect it and try to tweak it to make it the best and what he's looking for in that bait, because he knows exactly what he's looking for in the bait when it's in the water.
All right, very cool. I want to go to the instant feedback. Matt in North Carolina wants to know, do you ever throw a chatterbait when it's 55 degrees or lower?
Oh, yes. Quite often, it does work in some colder water scenarios. There's going to be some stuff released at the Bassmasters Classic that is going to help you get that jackhammer down a little deeper. So you guys might want to keep your eyes open at the Classic that week. There's going to be some new jackhammer releases.
All right. That ties right into Troy in Texas. He wants to know what makes the jackhammer different than other chatterbaits.
It's pretty much the Ferrari of chatterbaits. It has, we'll start off at the clip is a decoy double locking clip that goes on the blade. We spent a lot of money on its actual stainless blade. It's not a tin blade. So the stainless is very, very rigid, so you get better vibration out of it. We spent probably almost 2 years trying to perfect to keep, it has a green pumpkin painted blade. Well, if you guys know anything about stainless, it's not easy to get paint to stick to stainless steel. So it has a high-end paint on the blade. Has a unique head design with the actual what we call a blade keeper. It has a slot in the actual head where the hook or the actual wire that holds the blade on, it actually overbends into the head. So in any scenario, if the wire was to bend out, it can never come out of that slot and you can never lose your blade or the fish. And then the head design, it skips better than any other chatterbait on the market. It has a Gamakatsu, kind of not an EWG, but a wide gap, the medium wire flipping hook in it. And it has a double keeper and a hand-tied skirt. So, I mean, like I said, it's kind of the Cadillac Ferrari of chatterbaits. And yeah, it's a little bit more expensive than your standard chatterbait, but you don't lose that many chatterbaits. I mean, I'll go, all of practice and half the tournament and still use the same one. It just you gotta keep on throwing that thing, and it's not, like I said, it's not like it's not like a deep diving crankbait where you're casting out there in 25 feet of water and losing.
Spoken by a man who does not fish many pike waters. There's people in Wisconsin going, "Oh yeah, don't lose any of those things."
Yeah. Go to Lake Champlain. I excludes that, but. Yeah, I mean, unless you're fishing up there where there's some toothy critters, but most of the time it want to last you a long, long time. And like I said, I always throw it on 20-pound sunline fluorocarbon. I mean, whether I'm at Lake Mead where you can see 25 feet deep, or in Florida where you can see 6 inches deep, I just try to keep it on that heavy line.
All right, back to the instant feedback. Andy in Indiana wants to know. He says he remembers you saying that he had heard that you custom coat the blades. Do you still do that, or does Z-Man do that?
Custom what?
Custom coat custom coated blades?
No, I've never custom coated any blades.
Right.
And no, I mean, I get the question all the time. Like, it was funny last year when the jackhammer came out, some guys were watching me rig up, and I just got one out of the pack and, opened it up, and they're like, really? These are the ones you're using? I'm like, well, yeah, those are the ones I'm using. I don't do anything special to them. I mean, everything that I used to do, that I wanted special in a chatterbait is in the jackhammer. So I wanted a bait where I can rip it out of the package and it is good to go. You don't have to do anything to it.
All right, very cool. David in Wisconsin wants to know, what's the deepest water that you've caught a bass on a vibrating jig?
About 20 to 25 feet of water, I would say, letting it go to the bottom. Fishing ledge stuff, like let's say Kentucky Lake or something like that. Or, I've caught them, let's say 15 to 18 feet deep on an experimental jackhammer that might be coming out here real soon at the Bassmasters Classic. So we're going to have some new sizes so you can get that bait down a little deeper other than the 3/8 and a half. So something for guys to expand their depth range on chatterbait fishing.
All right, Andy in Indiana is clarifying that. He said that he thought that you painted them black, is what his comment was referring to.
Yeah, I never painted them. I was always using a black bladed jig. The Phoenix, when I first started using a Phoenix vibrating jig, they always had an anodized black blade. So that's, at the beginning, there's so many people always still had a green pumpkin chatterbait with a silver blade. And, I had that black anodized blade that just gives it a little, it's just not so flashy. It looks a little bit more natural. So that's what he was probably gearing towards. Yeah. But yeah, the jackhammer comes with, we have six dark blades and then 6 shiny blades right now in colors.
All right.
What is your relationship like with Brian Thrift? You guys are, obviously you fish the FLW tour there. I'm sure you know him. You're both on the Chatterbait pro team. But you guys have this weird connection with a bait. I mean, is it a rivalry? Is it a friendship? Is it nothing?
Yeah, I've known Brian for a long time, and he's obviously a phenomenal fisherman, and we've both been very, very successful with that bait. And it's not like it's a rivalry about chatterbait rivalry or anything like that. He goes and does his own thing, and I do my own thing. Like I said, we don't have like a little chatterbait clique that we get in once a month or something.
You guys wear a 3-piece patch.
I know.
On the back. You have to get jumped in.
Do you wear a leather vest, a chatterbait leather vest? The 1%ers of the Chatterbait Club? Is that what you're looking for?
Wow.
Here's a question. This was a Carolinas thing. You mentioned in there, with Hank Cherry, Andy Montgomery, Casey Ashley, Brian Thrift. Here you are. You're a dude from Arizona. No real ties to that. There are thousands of other guys who are fishing the tours, the top 150s, invitationals, Costas, Opens. Why do you think you were the only dude that latched onto this, not from the Carolinas, and kind of made it your own and turned it into something that you're known for, and not any of the other hundreds of guys out there who had the exact same opportunity?
I was the chosen one.
Figured it would be something like that.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It just, like I told you with my system, if you think about it, I'll just run through it real quick. It vibrates like a rattle trap. Okay. It has deflection and it hunts like a square bill crankbait. And you can fish it in places where you can't fish any other reaction baits. So those are part of the deal. And then I put my last thing on it is actually putting that swim bait trailer. So it gives you that profile, that swim bait profile. And not those, a lot of those guys were using a craw and other things on the back, but none of them were using that swim bait profile trailer on it. So that just gave it the little West Coast flair that all the bass are looking for.
All right, Craig in New York wants to know, do you ever fish it without a trailer?
I do not. No, I don't ever fish it without a trailer. Without a trailer, the bait wants to come up even more. That's why it's kind of nice to have a little bit bulkier trailer like the Zaco. It actually gets the bait down because the bait naturally wants to come up to the surface with that blade. That blade wants to lift the bait up. So having a bulkier, heavier bait, or if you wanted to get the bait up, you could go to a smaller, not less bulkier bait, and it'll actually make the bait come up to the surface more.
Okay, do you ever fish it with just the swim bait on it and no skirt?
I have done that, and that with no skirt actually makes the bait get down deeper. So if you want the bait, if I was going to go fish a ledge tournament and try to get the bait as deep as I could, I would rip the skirt off and just put my the Yamamoto Zaco in the back.
All right, Joe in Boston wants to know, is there any plans for a 3/4 ounce or a 1 ounce jackhammer?
Just stay tuned here in a couple weeks.
There you have it, Joe. All right.
Keep your eyes open.
All right, Dan, and I think Dan is in Arizona. I'm not sure, but he is referencing Lake Powell and wants to know, how would you use a chatterbait on a super, super clear water, and what would you target?
Lake Powell's obviously I'm very familiar with that place. On flood years, when you have any type of brush, I'm going to throw it just like I would a spinnerbait up around that brush or any type of cover. And on drought years, I'm just going to I'll just throw it on rocky points and stuff like that. Those fish, they will still react to a reaction bait in super clear water. But what you got to remember is, like on a dead slick calm day, you're probably not going to catch them on that. You need a little wind, something to break up that water to get those fish to come up and react to that. Or go looking for a little bit of stained water somewhere in Lake Powell, which there's plenty of those places too. So one way, you either got to have stained water, whether the cover is rock or brush, or you have to have some kind of wind if you're in that super clear water.
Okay, Mark in Minnesota wants to know, how important is the power of the rod when you're throwing a chatterbait?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things to landing the fish consistently is to have what I call it's a medium heavy to a heavy action glass rod. So I want something that has a nice parabolic tip but has power down, about halfway down the blank. So when you're looking for those rods, there's more and more of those rods out there. Obviously, I have an Evergreen International chatterbait rod that's made for the jackhammer, and it's a 7'3" heavy action glass rod. But again, it has that nice soft parabolic tip, which actually helps you cast the bait more accurately, and it allows the fish. They have a tendency to eat the chatterbait very aggressively. And especially if you have one on short line, it allows the fish to, you got to think, the best way I can compare it to is you got to think of the chatterbait not so much like a spinnerbait, but more so like you're fishing a square bill crankbait. So you want like more of a parabolic action to it. And the other thing, think about this, guys. Okay, a chatterbait, you have a direct line tie to the hook. There's no give to it, right? No give. You tie your line to a spinnerbait, you have a wire, okay? That when you pull on it, there's a bunch of give there. That's why with a spinnerbait, you need more of a graphite, medium heavy graphite rod than you do a glass rod, something like that, because there's give in that spinnerbait. It's flexing when you pull on that to set the hook. So with the chatterbait, you have a direct line tie. There's no stretch there. It's direct contact to that hook. So that's a little bit more tidbit for you there on rods.
That's cool stuff. You ever think about that, man?
I've never thought about that. I have felt the chatterbait rod that Brett uses, and as just a guy who fishes locally and is around, it feels different than any other rod that I've had my hands on. Just as far as how and where it bends, you're like, okay, this is a lot different than what I've been throwing a chatterbait on. Drastically different. Like, it takes time to get used to, I would imagine.
All right, very cool. All right, last question from the instant feedback, and then Brett will let you go. Back to the skirt and trailer, is it better to use the same color, or is it better to mix it up?
It's just whatever kind of looks good. If you're whatever kind of forage that you're trying to, go after. I mean, whether it's bluegill or perch or gizzard shad or something like that. That's the nice thing about the 12 colors that we have with the jackhammer, and I think we have 14 or 16 colors in the Zaco. You can probably mix and match from like a green pumpkin with a chartreuse bellied Zaco to you can kind of mix and match. It doesn't necessarily have to be right on. Like I've caught them on a green pumpkin with a black and blue trailer. But I do like to stick, obviously, dark colors to dark colors.
All right, very cool, man. Anything else, Matt?
No, just thanks for taking the time to be a part of this, both when I did the original filming with you, which actually took a couple hours out of the day. It was during one of the Elite Series tournaments a couple years ago, or 2016, I think. Yeah. And then also today, taking the time out from your Pelotron workout in the background to talk a little bit about the chatterbait with us.
Yeah, you got to get a ride in every once in a while.
That's right. All right, man. We will.
It was a great documentary, and pretty cool that you guys highlighted it, and I appreciate that you guys invited me to be in that documentary.
All right, very cool, man. We'll see you next week.
All right, see you guys.
See you
later.
All right, there you have it, Brett Hite. Good stuff, man. Learned some stuff from him. I had never really thought about the spinnerbait comparison.
No, 100%. The flex on that makes total sense.
Yeah. All right. Great show today. And once again, we'll have the documentary by itself on both the Bass Zone and also over on the 20feetdeep.com website. So if you didn't catch it, if you came in the middle of the show, the replay will be out there shortly. And then we will have this uploaded to iTunes for the iTunes.
Yeah, you can listen to the BTL version of it that includes Brett Hite.
Yeah.
Or just go watch the documentary.
Or the documentary by itself over on 20feetdeep.com. All right. Thursday show.
Oh, we got back-to-back gems.
All right. The final show
right
before
here.
we head to South Carolina for the Bassmaster
Classic. No, there's another week
Classic.
in between there, isn't there?
No, I don't think. No, it's next week, dude.
No.
Is it not?
What is today?
Today is the 6th.
Yeah, it's like the 17th is when the Classic starts.
Dude, we leave on Wednesday.
17th. Okay. All
right. Add 7, divide by 2, carry the 10, divided by the square root. Come on, man. It's next week.
Yeah, it is. Cool.
So our last show, all right, because we can't do a show on Tuesday of next week. You know why? It's my first derby of the year, the Old Man's Tournament Trail. Next Tuesday at Lake Eufaula with my partner, Ed Barton.
Yeah, you got a ringer.
And we'll see what happens next Tuesday.
I'm setting the over-under at 8 pounds.
Oh.
8 pounds for the over-under.
I'm taking the over on that one.
You think you could just roll in here? How often have you fished Lake Eufaula lately?
I am going to be the first one to admit I am totally dependent.
You know the locals that live on Lake Eufaula? You know how many guys fish Lake Eufaula? You think you can be in the top 10% on Lake Eufaula and go out there and cash a check?
I am part of the top 90%.
You're going to go out and you're going to spend the money to go there. You're going to spend the money for practice. You're probably going to get a sandwich at the gas station.
I'm not going to practice at all. Dude,
you're going to go in there and do it. You're going to donate your money over under 8 pounds.
I'm going to knock it out of the ballpark on that. Anyway, Thursday, the Thursday show, a gem, something that we've been doing for almost, I think this is year number 9, maybe. Yes or no?
The Odd Show, the Classic Odd Show. The actual Classic Odd Show, like Mark Jeffries, is a hypothetical bookie. These are not actual real odds. Obviously, you've seen odds come out over at Bassmaster. Jeffries, you started the odds.
Yes.
Then Ken Duke took them over.
Yeah.
Now it's whoever's free on a Monday does them.
Pretty much.
But these are the classic odds.
The betting line.
The betting line
All right?
for the Bass.
And then the other thing that we're going to do, you are going to work on your vintage prop bets. The prop bets that you had last year, very, very good.
Prop bets for the Classic and stuff. So that is Thursday's show, and then we are off to the Classic.
Yeah. It is here, my friends. So once again, I want to thank everybody that was involved with the documentary. Really appreciate the comments on the instant feedback. And spread the word. It is, I believe, there have not been that many true documentaries on the evolution of a lure from the start, from the inventor all the way through to where it is today, and really that has won. Can you think of a bait that has probably won more money in the last 15, 20 years than the Chatterbait?
Just the Alabama rig, but not at the professional level.
Yeah.
And Brian Thrift mentioned that.
Yeah. So very cool stuff. Excited about Thursday. And everybody, the Classic is here. Next week is when it's going to happen. And we'll talk a little bit about it. We might even have Stephen Browning on. I know you were working on that. We didn't mention that.
Yeah, we'll see. He won the Open on Ross Barnett.
Using what?
Ken Iobi. Yeah, we met you at the beginning using the Chatterbait, using the jackhammer. So he's good on that lake. He's I would almost, that has to be one of his favorite lakes when you look back at his history on Ross Barnett. It is a good lake for the Chatterbait. So and big thanks to Brett Hite. He had to get up early. He had to get up at like 7 for that.
Boy, he was working out.
Yeah, that's
on the cycle.
Yeah, you've seen the Pelotron commercials, right? Where they have it like at the bay window where there's a motivational speaker go, you can do it. They're doing like a spin class in New
That's
York.
what I need, man. I need one of those.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, be safe. We will talk to you on Thursday with the Classic Odds Show. Everybody, stay tuned. We're back in a couple. See ya.